Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Can I start with an apology? I began by saying you learn something new every day, and I've learned that furore is one of those words that can change its spelling as you cross the Atlantic. The front page of the Philadelphia Daily News, published earlier today, carries the magnificent headline, "The New Furore," with a photograph of Donald Trump, his right hand raised heavenwards in what looks every inch like a Hitler salute. And in fact, some of his utterances in a recent speech sounded every inch the Hitler rhetoric as well. I'm going to try and unravel some of those elements as well. But the apology is, I've forgotten the name of the principle by which you sort of expand the boundaries of acceptable debate. So you say something outrageous, I mean really outrageous, something that absolutely offends anybody possessed of a fully functioning intellect or something that remotely resembles a human heart. You say something disgusting like, Holocaust echoes, or let's ban people from going into public places on the grounds of their skin colour, or let's ban people from coming into a country on the grounds of a faith which they can't prove or disprove they either adhere to or don't adhere to. I mean, absolute stone-cold textbook fascism. But here's the thing. So Trump will get reactions from decent people across the country. And let's be clear about one other thing as well. A lot of those people who cheer for people like Trump are just frightened and not very well educated. It's the clever ones you have to worry about. So people who write Islamophobia for magazines like The Spectator, not people who send letters about Islamophobia to newspapers like The Sun, that you have to worry about. They know exactly what they're doing. I'm not sure which category Trump fits into, to be honest with you. But and it's not fair to say thick either. It's just low levels of education, very, very little experience of a world beyond the end of their own front yard, and a susceptibility to feeling anger very quickly after fear. So Trump knows exactly what he's doing. But there is a phrase, there is a principle. It's like, Godwin's law on the internet. There's a rule that if you have any political debate, eventually someone will call someone else a Nazi. Well, a stop clock is right twice a day. We're firmly into Nazi territory now with Donald Trump. But there's another one that says, you say something outrageous and it slightly changes the nature of debate. Because if you row back from something as outrageous as saying, let's ban all Jews, or let's ban all Muslims, or let's ban all Christians from a shopping centre or a school or a country, you then just slightly push the envelope of what's acceptable in the terms of debate. So even when right-thinking people, decent people, nice people, push back against that kind of rhetoric, they'll never push it back to quite where it was before. So Trump may well say, well, maybe we don't need to ban them all from the country, but hey, we could make them all wear badges. Do you see what I mean? His next announcement on the issue might not be as extreme as his last one, but it will still be deeply obnoxious. It will seem less obnoxious because the bar has been raised by this ludicrous but deeply, deeply disturbing comment. I'm going to play it to you once, that's all, because you may not have heard it. You may have heard it on Nick's show earlier, but I'm certainly not going to batter you over the head with it, largely because I think it will cause you great upset, actually, if you have the ability to empathise simply by substituting the word Muslims for a word that would apply to you, and also because of that thing I've just identified, that notion that you raise the bar of acceptable debate by going into unacceptable territory, and then the next thing you say will be deeply obnoxious, but because it's not as obnoxious as the last thing you said, you might get away with it. Have a listen.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on. We have no choice. We have no choice. We have no choice.
Moments ago, the executive director of CARE, which is an acronym that stands for the largest Muslim advocacy group in the United States, responded to Trump's call.
And today, just in the afternoon, we were extremely shocked to hear Donald Trump calling for total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the US. This is outrageous, coming from someone who wants to assume the highest office in the land. It is reckless and simply un-American. Donald Trump sounds more like a leader of a lynch mob than a
Stone
great nation
cold
like ours.
fascism. Nazi playbook. Substitute the word Muslim for the word Jew. Substitute the word Muslim for the word black. Substitute the word Muslim for the word white or the word Christian, whatever you want it to be. Stone cold fascism. No point pretending otherwise. Absolutely stone cold. And the people cheering, I stress again, deserve a modicum of sympathy. Obviously, there are plenty of people who aren't very well educated and are susceptible to fear who don't turn into chuntering racists at the drop of a hat. But you have to understand the difference between somebody who has had a look around the world and ended up in a position of absolute rancid rhetoric, and people who've never got we don't understand this about America. I think it's a British problem. We only really visit the East Coast and the West Coast. We see very cosmopolitan, metropolitan societies in New York and San Francisco, in Los Angeles, maybe in Boston. DC you may have visited. You probably haven't been. I certainly haven't been into the sort of great dust bowl, the hinterland, the areas of America where, you know, we like to snigger about the fact that they don't have passports. But if you look at the size of America and the length of time it would take you to travel somewhere from the middle of the country, it's perfectly understandable that they don't have passports. I've said to you a few times recently that I didn't really realise that this stuff would happen in my lifetime. I was born in 1972, and penny only dropped relatively recently that I was born closer to the Second World War than we are now to the year I was born. I still feel relatively young. I thought Nazism and fascism belonged in the history books. Obviously, some recent developments in Britain have reminded me that fascism is always bubbling away under the surface. There'll always be people prepared to get rich and famous by terrifying others, by turning people against each other, by turning neighbour against neighbour. It is a very good business model, and in this country, thankfully, we've still managed to keep it at the bottom of the pile. We still managed to keep a lid on it, although there have been moments in recent years where you've wondered whether that lid was going to blow off. In France, it looks like it is blowing off. France, remember, was under Nazi occupation until the end of the Second World War, until we liberated it. We are traditionally the great enemies of fascism, but so is America. And they're cheering a fascist for making fascist statements. I don't like feeling confused. I've told you that a million times in my life. I don't like feeling befuddled. I don't like staring at things for hours and hours and hours and not seeing any sense, not being able to make sense of the picture in front of me. And that is very much where we are today. You look at that, you see a man standing up. There'll be a couple of people in this country who will be cheering along as well, and that's fine. This is a free democracy. That's the whole point. The same freedom that allows people to cheer nonsense like that is the freedom that means you can go and worship and pray wherever you want. You can write whatever you want. I can say on this program whatever I want within the bounds of reasonable laws. That's the point. We live there. And the kind of people who, until we figure out what the hell is going on, they're never going to figure out what the hell is going on because they don't want to understand the world around them. They want old, simple certainties. They want to be made to feel part of some mythical past that never really exists. Muhammad Ali is a Muslim. Muhammad Ali, right, is a Muslim. Donald Trump has been photographed with Muhammad Ali, sucking up to him and praising him as this, praising him as the other. Barack Obama came out the other day and talked about all the Muslim sports stars in America. Donald Trump said there weren't any. There's a man who's had his own selfie taken with Muhammad Ali. I mean, it's mad. It's absolutely lunatic behaviour. If Donald Trump was poor, if Donald Trump was a poor man, standing on a street corner shouting stuff like that, I think he'd get arrested. I really do. I think that level of delusion would probably demand some form of medical intervention. American justice and health systems being what they are, it would probably be the police that got involved rather than a paramedic. In this country, you started spouting that sort of thing on a street corner, you'd come to the attention either of a doctor or a police officer. But if you're a billionaire and you're in a room full of cheering rednecks, you can get away with it. You can do it. And they end up winning sometimes. Fascists get elected. Mussolini was elected. Hitler was elected. It happens. Marine Le Pen is getting elected in France. I don't know whether she actually puts her hands up in the air and says, I am a fascist, whether she actually truly states what she is. Politicians in this country don't. Politicians in France do. She's managed to tone down some of the anti-Semitism of her father, but remember, the party hasn't changed. It's a terrible time to be anything other, I would suggest, than sort of white and either irreligious or ostensibly Christian. The world is really bubbling, really boiling. And you hear a speech like that from America. It's not come from Syria. It's not North Korea. It's not some sort of apartheid-era South Africa. It's America. Our oldest, fiercest, greatest ally. A country that elected Barack Obama not that long ago. Now you've got a man standing up effectively saying, let's ban everybody from the country. Donald Trump, I don't know how many people he employs. He will have Muslim staff on his payroll. You know? He will have Muslim staff on his payroll. It's a man who tweeted not that long ago about how awful it was that American jobs were being exported to China, and then someone replied with a label from a Donald Trump t-shirt that said made in China on it. I mean, the man is so utterly and completely removed from reality that one wonders, frankly, whether you can ever fix a problem like that. I don't know. I think just from my own interactions with people who revel in their sort of bigotry and hatred, I think people choose to be like that. I think people choose to be like that. I don't think necessarily you sit here in a sort of educated, pluralistic, hopefully vaguely intelligent bubble, and you look at people like Donald Trump, and you find yourself wondering whether you will ever be able to get your head around that kind of attitude. You will ever really be able to, because, and I say this cautiously, I don't understand why a billionaire does it, because in a sense you'd imagine he was quite happy with the hand that life had dealt him. All the other people cheering, they think their whole lives are somebody else's fault. They are utterly persuaded that Jews or Muslims or gays or women or family planning, they're all the reason why your life hasn't panned out like you were expecting it to. I think about 33,000 shootings every year in America, deaths by gun shootings. Donald Trump's response to the latest one is to ban all Muslims. He's a Nazi. How do you fix a problem like that? How do you address it? Can you ever turn around an attitude like Donald Trump's? Alex says he's not a fascist, James. He's too right-wing for that. He's a free market racist. Terrifying that the Republicans might pick him. It would leave the sensible right without a home. Just pick up the phone now. Give me a call. Tell me your thoughts. What's he playing at? 0345 6060 973. And can anybody possessed of such ridiculous and dangerous and terrifying views, can anyone ever be talked down from a position like that? Or do they actually thrive on the hate? Are they nourished by the bitterness? I haven't got a clue. And I've been talking for far too long, which is what I tend to do when I'm confused. Call me, 0345 6060 973. Respond to what you just heard. We're in 2015. That was in America. It wasn't 1939 in Germany. Might as well have been. Just a little bit of wordplay. It's the only difference. What do you do? How do you fight that? There you go. We got to the question in the end. How do you fight that? How do you fight that level of ignorance and hatred? Can you? I think we have to try, but how do you do it? I tweeted this some time ago. It's a percentage that will probably shock you. Should the United States offer a haven in this country for Jewish refugees from Central Europe? This was on December the 12th, 1938, and it was taken among college students, people that you'd hope were possessed of a slightly more rounded worldview. I'll just remind you of that question. Should the United States offer a haven in this country for Jewish refugees from Central Europe? It's just under 70% of American college students in 1938 answered no to that question.
In 1939, 61% of Americans polled did not approve of resettling Jewish refugee children trying to escape the Third Reich. The government even went so far as to turn away a boat filled with German refugees. The MS St. Louis sending it back to Europe, where a lot of its passengers were killed in the Holocaust. Not our proudest moment.
So, Donald Trump stands up and calls for everybody who is a Muslim, although quite how you'd identify that is beyond me, to be banned from the country. It's perhaps not that surprising that people cheer. But can you actually address a mindset like that? It is, logically, for anyone who's sort of sitting there thinking, well, actually, you know, I'm frightened of Muslims as well. I don't really know any, and as far as I'm concerned, they could all be terrorists. You are 170 times more likely to drown in your bath in America than you are to die as the result of a terrorist act. So Donald Trump would make 170 times more sense when he talks about protecting American lives if he called for a ban on baths. That is just a stone-cold item of logic. If he's serious about protecting American lives, he would ban bathing, because that is 170 times more likely to cause an American to die than a terrorist attack. And yet, there will be people on both sides of the Atlantic who think he's got a point. And it's the inability of people like me to see what possible point he could have that makes it so hard to fight, to tackle, to address. Apart from, you know, chuntering, foam-flecked, spittle-flecked fury, which you can't really rationalise or deal with logically, how can you possibly dismantle the arguments of a man who is espousing a notion of such mind-numbing idiocy? I don't know. Do you? Farah's in Harrow. Farah, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. How are you doing?
I'm fine. What's on your mind?
I was just thinking about Donald Trump. There's been so much going on with him. It's like he's just a racist. I don't know what you can call him, but what I see it as, until people don't understanding Muslims as a whole, and they start uniting, you get all your Muslims, your Jews, your Christians, all your religions come together and stand up against people like this and say, no, it's not everybody that does this. It's not going to help anybody.
Do you not think we have? Do you not think the world is fairly clearly divided among people who promote violence and terror and people who abhor it? I mean, it's just absurd to suggest that 1.8 billion people are all cheering along Jihadi John while everybody else on the planet is quaking. It's just...
And it is. And one thing to see is actually, if you look at ISIS, I think they're happily doing this because they want the West to turn against all Muslims. So Muslims, probably start thinking, and there are some, if you've seen the incidents, they're thinking, okay, the West is turning against us anyway, so why not join them? So you're not really, helping. You're just making people think. And I don't know. I mean, I myself am a Muslim. I've lived in Pakistan for like 20 years. I was born here and everything, and I went to Pakistan and lived there for 20 years. But I moved back to the UK for the safety of my children. Because of my sect, because I'm a Shia, I had to move because we were, being attacked there, and I'm sure you're all familiar with that. Yes. So I had to move from there to actually for the safety of my children. So I'm a Muslim, but I'm also under threat with these people. So, how does that make me part of their support? That's
See, I think it's a brilliant point, because when he says that we've got to do this until they tell us what the hell is going on, they don't want to. He doesn't want to hear what's going on. He doesn't want to hear anything that portrays Islam, which is the sort of bête noire of the far right these days. He doesn't want to hear anything that dilutes the fear, because without the fear and the hate, he's got nothing. He's got nothing. I mean, what's he selling apart from fear and hatred?
That's all he's selling is hatred. And then you've got that man who went on a Parenthood shootout last week. So what does that make him? I mean, he's not exactly a Muslim. He's from, I guess, a Christian religion. But, I mean, we're not going to blame all Christians for that.
Well, no, we're not going to blame all Christians for that.
Yeah, we're not going to blame everybody for that.
It would be as logical. We've got to respond to this attack upon the abortion clinic by banning all Christians from America for the next 25 years. That's Trump. It's the same thing. But I don't know that you can help me get inside the head of someone like that. I get the chuntering hatred. I get the fury. My whole life is somebody else's fault, and I understand why people like Trump and people in this country sell hatred and fear, because it sells newspapers, it wins votes, although not that many in Oldham. It creates celebrities out of people possessed of very, very few attractive traits. They're selling fear and hatred. But how can you battle them? How can you fight them? Paul's in Brecon. Paul, what would you do?
Right. Well, first of all, I'd like to say that Trump is, I believe, totally wrong. I actually think he's against the American Constitution. which guarantees the freedom of religion. So I actually think his remarks are against that.
Right, he's only banning Muslims from arriving. I don't think yet he's suggesting that any already there have to leave or stop praying. So
yes, but you're distinguishing still by religion inside the law. So
yes,
I'm not sure. I'm not an expert on that, but obviously his remarks are absolutely wrong. But it's not a racist remark, of course, because Islam is not a race; it's a religion.
Well, you say that, and for me, the parallels with Judaism are quite pertinent here, because under Donald Trump's worldview, if I was born into a Muslim family, how can I prove to him I'm not a Muslim?
Look, Donald Trump's view of the world scares me.
Well, that's what we're talking about. So you said it's not racism. So how can I... No, hang on. I want to clarify this, because it is racism. It's bigotry in its simplest sense. How can I prove to him that I'm not the enemy he accuses me of being?
Well, regardless of which race you are, if you're a Muslim, according to him, you get banned. So,
but I'm saying I'm not a Muslim. He's saying your parents are. You're not coming into my country.
You're talking about the technicality of how you prove it.
No, I'm not. I'm saying it is. I understand why some people like to say it's not racism, it's an ideology. But it is racism. It's taking something over which you have no control, a faith into which you happen to have been born, and using it as a stick to beat you with or a criteria to keep you out of a country.
According to your race, according to your belief.
No, according to something. It's not a belief.
But Islam is a belief.
Yes, and I was born to Muslim parents, but I don't believe in God. I'm still not allowed into America under Donald Trump. It's a very simple distinction to make. I understand why some people don't want it to be made. They want to sort of say, no, it's an ideology, it's a belief. It's not. If you believe that terrorism is okay, that's fine. You deserve to be treated with derision and contempt. If you just believe in God, or you were born to parents who believe in God, how can that possibly be grounds for excluding you from an entire continent? The world is going mad, and Americans are cheering.
James O'Brien, weekdays 10 till 1 on LBC. 24 minutes to 11. It is a statement of such chuntering idiocy that you would prefer to ignore it. But when it's uttered by a man who is currently leading the field of one of America's main political parties for the presidential nomination, you can't just ignore it. So Donald Trump stands up, and I'm told now he did actually say any Muslims currently out of the country won't be allowed back in. He just gets madder and madder. And yet, trying to unpick that madness, not the anger and the fear, because those are things that people have been encouraged and provoked to feel. The people doing the encouraging and the provoking are the problem, not the people feeling it, even though, you know, they've all got votes. How do you unpick something like that? Something like Donald Trump's statement there. How do you actually unpick it? 0345 6060 973. What thread do you tug? It's so patently obvious to anybody possessed of, I'd say, I don't know what I'd say, eyes, actually. Eyes that work, metaphorically speaking, that he's talking dangerous nonsense. But what thread do you pull to make other people in that crowd realise what an idiot, what a dangerous idiot he is? 0345 6060 973. Ronnie's in Finchley. Ronnie, what would you like to say?
Well, putting to one side the morality of what he said for one moment, let's just tackle the logic and gargantuan irony here. I mean, it's the same Republicans who are ramping up the violence of us versus them rhetoric for fear that, I don't know, one brown-skinned terrorist may sneak past their unbelievably tight Homeland Security controls. These same Republicans want broad accessibility to weapons. We know the statistics. I think it's over 100 more Americans are killed by gun violence in their own country than have been killed by terrorists in the last 14 or 15 years. Almost all...
Every month more people die from gun killings than have been killed by terrorism since 2000.
Exactly. Almost all violence in America is homegrown. So, look, Trump is not only a fascist or a Nazi, whatever you want to call him, but within the internal logic of his own argument, this is full width, talking to pigeons madness. And obviously he is exploiting the fear and suspicion.
But it works. So I think
it does work.
What you've got when you sort of find yourself getting your news from a variety of sources, when you find yourself mixing and talking to people from a variety of backgrounds, it's mind-numbingly dangerous and stupid. But if you are none of those things, if you don't talk to people from a variety of backgrounds, if you don't get your news from a variety of sources, if you salute flags and instead of respecting humans, is there any way you can get under the skin of the people in the room that would cheer this sort of stuff?
You're asking me that question?
I am, Ronnie.
Well,
Place. And I know this will sound odd. The shortness of their
George
holidays.
Bush, I think, had he never been to a country outside the United States when he was elected president, I seem to remember some extraordinary statistic. They are the most insular nation on earth.
I've been reading a bit about this, and because I used to go full in on that as well. But if you look at the sheer size of that actually probably has more to do with the absence of passports and foreign travel than anything that you would describe as insularity in a mental sense.
Of course. Look, it's a massive country. My own son is an American citizen. He teaches at a university on the East Coast. There is an enormous number of incredibly sophisticated, intellectually powerful Americans, but they don't seem to have a very strong voice in the political arena. And it is remarkable that, you know, we had Reagan, we had both Bushes, we've got a host of rather disappointing and mediocre candidates for the.
But if you've got one of these people sitting in front of you,
it's absolutely mind-numbing.
It is, and Ben Carson has, I think, described the pyramids as having been built for grain storage and wants to bring in a system of taxation based on the Bible. And he's one of Donald Trump's rivals. But we can't. I mean, with sniggering's great, pointing and laughing works, but not with the people in the room. What do you say? You've got one of them sitting in front of you, nice person, cheering Donald Trump's comments. What do you say to them? Is there anything you can say? Is there a line, a thread?
You certainly don't say anything judgmental about the morality of what is being said. You tried to do what I hope I tried to do, which was to unpick the logic, the internal logic of the argument. Bombard this person with precisely the statistic that you mentioned. And whether it works, I don't know. We know it didn't work in Germany in the 30s. We know it hasn't worked in country after country. And the democratic process actually seems, strangely, to be a self-defeating mechanism at times like this. When someone like Trump has access to, I don't know, hour upon hour of television time, miles and miles of column inches covering his every word, the media, let's face it, is not exactly innocent in all of this.
No, and they haven't got a BBC in America, of course, so everybody is chasing Benjamins, everybody is chasing the dollars, and will therefore, in the way that all commercial media organisations in some way will do, you'll flirt with fascism a little bit because it's good box office. I don't think anyone's immune from that accusation in the commercial broadcasting sector in any free country. Paul is in Cromer, and I thank you, Ronnie. Paul's in Cromer. I love Cromer. Hello, Paul.
Hi, good morning to you, sir. How are you doing?
I'm grand, thank you.
Excellent.
Has the end of Pier show started yet for Christmas?
The fall started already. The fall started ramping up a couple of weeks ago. So I'm going to be taking my family there this Christmas, definitely. Yeah, I just want to throw something else into the mix there, sir. Yes. I served for 24 years in the British Army, done a number of tours in Iraq, working alongside Iraqi forces and also US and other coalition forces when I was across there. Yeah. Now, at that particular time, we had a lot of LNs, what we call them local nationals, local nationals, Iraqis that were working for us, interpreters, and they were transporting loads for us, they were acting as guides, all various different roles. Yes. I've recently been across there again, working as a private security operator for a private security company, and I was actually in Baghdad when Mosul fell, when ISIL first pushed into Mosul. God. Now, the American states, they have a program at the moment which allows Iraqis that's worked for US forces, government forces supporting the US mission in Iraq and other coalition forces and what have you, to return to the States, because a lot of these guys, a lot of these families, one, that put their own lives on the line, two, some of these guys have lost line, some of them have lost their lives and have been, they suffered with terrible injuries. But on top of that as well, because they've worked for US and other coalition forces, they've been targeted by various different groups in Iraq. Their families have been targeted, and they've been targeted themselves. Now, there's a program that's set up at the moment for interpreters, anybody that's worked with US forces, to return back to the US to provide safety for them, and in a way of thanks to saying, thanks for all the work that you've done for us. Now, is it going to take away that program at the minute? These are guys that put their life on the line, and these are guys that undoubtedly, things that I've seen myself, they saved American lives. I know that for a fact. I've seen it with my own eyes, and I've been witness to this. You know, is this person, you know, what a credit.
They're not allowed in. They're not allowed in. I don't care how many American soldiers' lives they've saved. I don't care how many people they've protected. So they're not coming in because they're Muslims.
God, and I'm sure, I'm absolutely certain that, you know, there's going to be lots and lots of American soldiers, I think, exactly like me, and lots of British soldiers, I think, exactly like me. And it's just awful. I understand these.
Can I run something by you? Can I run something by you?
Yes, of course you can, sir.
Because can you stop calling me sir? If anything, it should be the other way round, all right? Here's the thing. I come up with these highfalutin theories and thoughts sometimes.
Yeah.
And I have one, which is, if you've got two tribes that are at each other's throats, there will be two types of people in both tribes. There will be the types of people who think that the best way to create peace is for the two tribes to get on with each other very well. And then there'll be people that think that the best way to create peace is to wipe out the other tribe. And you'll have both of those positions will be represented on both sides.
Yeah.
You as a military man, you as a man of action, I would want you in my team. And yet the way you speak, it seems to me, you understand also the people who think we'd be better off making peace than trying to annihilate the opposition. Do you think it's evolutionary, Paul? Do you think you're just built that way? You're either built as someone who thinks, look, we're going to end up killing each other. An eye for an eye turns the whole world blind, but still some people subscribe to it. And then on the other side, you've got some people who may end up leading us into danger by being too peaceful, too pacifistic, but it's actually almost like a characteristic, a personality trait, something you've inherited in your DNA rather than a position you've arrived at.
Yeah, I mean, I've went through a massive change since I left the forces.
Really?
In what have you. Yeah, big time. And, you know, one, I've become, you know, much more tolerant of people around me and, you know, just the human race in general. And it's almost like the curtains have been pulled right back. And, you know, I've seen some of these situations, exactly what they are. And, you know, how do you get the people that are creating war into dialogue? How do you get the people that are creating terror into dialogue? I'm not entirely sure. I'm not intelligent enough to come up with the answer for that. But I definitely don't think the way to go about this whole situation is by creating more casualties. I really, really don't. And I do fear for myself. I fear for my family, and you know, I fear for the wider population and the world in general. And you know, I don't want to get on my soapbox or anything else here.
Feel free. You'll always have a platform here, Paul.
You know, for all these people, you know, and I think, you know, there's lots of them out there. For all these people saying, you know, the bloody refugees and this, that, and the other. Actually, when you think about it, you know, these people that are coming in with their families, I wouldn't want to leave my family behind. You know, I wouldn't want to send my family away to a country for safety while I stay and fight. I want to protect, you know, my family, you know, also. And for the males that are returning from Syria and stuff, for the males that want to escape the fight, the single males. Now, it's okay, you know, everybody kind of sat there in the average house saying, oh, well, why don't they stay and fight? Yeah, well, that's fine. If you've got one person that thinks like that, well, that's cool, but you know, ultimately, collectively, everybody's got to think like that. So what's everybody going to do? They're going to go, actually, you know, I'm going to follow everybody else. I'm going to get it with myself.
Yeah, absolutely. You should stay and fight on your own with a pea shooter.
Yeah, exactly.
It's an astonishing argument. It's like other people saying it's the Muslims have got to deal with the ISIL problem. It was a great thing I saw on social media, but I think it was a lad called Imran. He said, hello, ISIS, it's Imran here. Could you stop, please? Because I'm getting some jip down at the shops. What do they expect these people to do? But I'm interested that you've been on a journey. I'm interested that you've changed your position, because as a soldier, that line of Tennyson always echoes with me. Yours is not to reason why. Yours is just to do and die. And of course, you've started reasoning why, and it's led you to interesting places. 0345 6060973. Speaking of interesting places, that End of Pier show in Cromer, if you do ever get the chance to go to it, it's like stepping back in time, but in a good way, not in a listening to Donald Trump kind of way. And when Jed Bush calls you unhinged, it's probably time to take a long, hard look in the mirror. But of course, if you had hair like Donald Trump's, a mirror would probably be the last thing you wanted to go near. No laughing matter, though, him calling for every Muslim in the world to be banned from entering America, and any American Muslims currently outside the country not to be allowed back in. That would, of course, include serving soldiers. I'm trying to find the thread you could tug to reveal his idiocy to the people in that crowd cheering him. And I actually have to just read an email from Frank, who was cross with my description of Americans cheering. And you're absolutely right, Frank. It was just, loose speak, but I'll read your email by way of recompense. He said, James, you just said Americans cheered. How many of America's 300 million citizens cheered? Should I say that whenever Nigel Farage speaks, the British people cheer? Trump's rhetoric is anti-American. It's against the US Constitution, whose First Amendment is freedom of speech, and American people will not stand for it. Trump is having his deranged 15 minutes. Please stop giving his words so much oxygen. You make some excellent points, but I think it would be remiss of us not to talk about it, not least because we are addressing the idiocy that he spouts in the hope, perhaps, of dismantling it. And how do you dismantle it? What would be the best way? I mean, one way I'd do it, I'd ask him, how are you going to tell at the airport who's a Muslim and who isn't? How are you going to tell? Well, they've got a Muslim name. Yeah, but it doesn't tell you anything about what they believe, what they hold to be true. And Islamic State being the enemy du jour, how are you going to tell the difference between the kind of Muslim they would want to kill and the kind of Muslim they wouldn't want to? I mean, how are you going to do it? So you've got this ban in place. How are you going to tell who is a Muslim and who isn't? If you can answer me that question. Because what he really means is we just won't let any, brown people? People with funny names? People without foreskins? How are you going to play it, Don? How are you actually going to play it? You turn up, because, my name is O'Brien. I might be a Muslim. For all you know, I might have converted yesterday. How are you actually going to do it? How's it going to work? Oh, you're coming from a Muslim country? Yeah, I'm fleeing because I flipping hate them. They're awful, those Muslims. How are you going to do it? Here I am. I've just arrived at JFK. Am I a Muslim or not? Go on. Take a punt and then send me home. Or let me in. How are you going to do it? That's the thing about fascism. It never makes sense on the second line. But it doesn't matter because so many people are swallowing the first line.
But I do think there is a special important need to make sure that Christians from Syria are being protected because they're being slaughtered in the country. And but for us, who would take care of the number of Christians that right now are completely displaced? And I think we should have we should focus our efforts as it relates to refugees for the Christians that are being slaughtered.
How does the United States, how do screeners tell which refugees are Christian and which ones are not?
Well, we do that all the time.
Focus on Christian families actually look like? Is that going to...
Well, you're a Christian. I mean, you can prove you're a Christian.
How?
I think you can prove it. If you can't prove it, then you err on the side of caution.
Under the Refugee Act of 1980, governors cannot legally block refugees from settling in their community.
When I hear folks say that, well, maybe we should just admit the Christians but not the Muslims. When I hear political leaders suggesting that there would be a religious test for which person who's fleeing from a war-torn country is admitted, when some of those folks themselves come from families who benefited from protection when they were fleeing political persecution, that's shameful. That's not American. It's not who we are. We don't have religious tests to our compassion.
Mark Twain, as ever, something apposite to say. It's easier to fool people than it is to convince them that they've been fooled. Thank you, Wayne, for sending me that line. That is precisely what we're doing this hour. How would you convince these people? How would you show these people that they'd been fooled? No one wants to admit it. You know when people get scammed on the phones, when they get kind of scammed by those chain letters and say, if you send me £50,000, send me $50 and I'll send you $1 million. They go back again and again and again. The people are taken again and again and again. There's a poor woman in the paper today taken for £140,000. They keep coming back for more. Because once you've crossed that line into delusion, born of, in this case, romance, but in other cases, fear, once you've crossed that line, it's a big journey back. It's a much longer journey back to sanity once you've crossed into irrational hatred. Mark Twain, it's easier to fool people than it is to convince them that they've been fooled. How would you show that crowd there in America cheering Donald Trump that they'd been fooled? I'd go in, first of all, with that question, I reckon. How can you tell who's a Muslim and who isn't? Sarah's in Hampstead. Sarah, what would you like to say?
I'm furious. I'm spitting blood this morning. This is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, I'm thinking back to the 80s when we had the IRA problem. Can you imagine if Reagan or somebody said, "Oh, anybody with an Irish name, you include it, Mr. O'Brien, or anyone who's Catholic will not be allowed"? Can you imagine what the Americans would have said if somebody had come out with such a statement? And I'm shocked that the Republican Party hasn't just kicked this guy out.
Well, they can't, can they? I wouldn't have thought. And also, it adds to the mythology. It adds to the mythology. We see it in this country with UKIP, this notion that the media is somehow against them, while their leader has more newspaper columns and television appearances than the rest of the political class put together. It's the narrative of victimhood, you see, coupled with sociopathic fascism.
It's just absolutely ridiculous. So my second point is, what about Saudi Arabia? One of America's closest allies. You know, isn't that Muslim oil that the Americans are buying, and the reason why they pay a fraction of what the rest of the world pays for their oil?
I think, certainly last time I checked, that Fox News' second biggest shareholder, or News Corp's second biggest shareholder, was a Saudi prince.
Or somebody like that. Yes, I think that's correct. And no one from the Arab world is speaking out. The Saudis, the Qataris, no one is saying anything.
No, because they're autocracies. They're part of the problem, not the solution. They're the people that keep they keep the oil flowing to the West, and the West keeps their corrupt regimes in power.
Yeah, but
and it's ordinary people, who will usually be Muslims, who suffer, and now they suffer from both ends. So they're getting abused and oppressed in their own countries, and now they're getting told by Donald Trump they can't come to his.
Yeah. But unfortunately, in America, he's got people who listen to what he's saying, because, as one of your callers said, they're very blinkered in their exposure to what's going on in the rest of the world.
I'm just going with frightened. I'm not going with insular. I'm not going with blinkered, even though they're probably accurate. I don't think it helps to add negatives to the pile. So let's just go with frightened. They're frightened, and some people are getting rich and powerful on the bandwagon of fomenting that fear. What would you do? What line would you use? What thread would you tug to show these people they're being fooled?
I don't know. To me, it seems just logical. Particularly America, that prides itself on being a melting pot of all nations and all people and all colors and all religions. It just seems to be so against their fundamental constitution. I mean, I think I'd just go back to basics and look up where people come from.
Yeah, so you'd say, hey, imagine if we banned all Christians because of the terror attacks on the family planning clinics. But they'd say, well, hell no, this is a Christian country, and they probably don't realise that it comes from the Middle East, that their religion comes from the Middle East as well. They probably don't realise.
That's the problem, that they don't seem to be, educated enough or knowledgeable enough about what's going on.
And then we're back to that problem of portraying them as ignorant. I would say frightened and not very well educated, and that's been true throughout history. These people do not end up in power. That's why they lock up the journalists, they lock up the intellectuals, they lock up the thinkers and the university professors. Donald Trump would shut down any newspaper that criticised him faster than you can say comb over. He really would. And yet, I don't know that we've made much progress together this morning in trying to work out how you show them they've been fooled. Except that one line. How are you going to decide who gets in and who gets out? And then you realise it's fascism because of the people shouting back at you, keep them all out, it's the only way we can ever be safe. God bless America. Let me remind you what we're discussing. It's Donald Trump's comments. Muhammad Ali has been in touch. No, not that one. He says, I am a British Muslim. That's how I knew it wasn't the boxer. I'm very proud to be British. I'm very proud of British people. I practice my faith when I have time. And then he adds, lol. Because that is kind of like most people's attitude to religion. If you are religious, you practice when you have time. You pray when you're kind of scared or lonely. Most people, the relationship that they have with religion is one of comfort. And he adds, but before I sleep, I always pray for humanity and those less fortunate than myself, whether they're black, white, Chinese, black Mexican, etc., because this is what we were taught. This is what the Prophet too taught us. So as hurtful and painful as it is to hear Donald Trump say these horrible things, I will pray for him because I feel sorry for him. I feel sorry that he feels this narrative he supports is in any way helpful. It's not. It will spike hate and fear. And this is the line that struck me. I get sent so many emails, I can't read out a fraction of them, but sometimes you just get me right in Right in the vital organs. I would have loved to have visited Yellowstone one day, but honestly, I'm scared of my name causing me problems now, so I will visit the beautiful Lake District instead. Thank you for your show. I know I speak for the... You're very kind. I don't read out stuff like that. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need to tell me whether or not you can think of a kind of magic bullet, the little thread you could tug to do what Mark Twain says is even harder than fooling people. Mark Twain says it's harder to show people, to convince them they've been fooled. So we know how hard it is, because we know in this country we've got problems with people falling for the narrative of fear and hatred, being turned on each other and their neighbours. And it's going to get worse, I think, before it gets better. But there are always little lines you can use, little threads you can tug. And I want you to tell me today how you would deal with Donald Trump. I'm going all in at the moment on the person at the airport whose job it is to decide who's a Muslim and who isn't. Who's going to do that? How are you going to do that? How are you going to? And this is why when people say it's not racism, it's a religion, they're wrong when they say that. Obviously, Islam's not a race in the strict scientific sense of the word. But if you're going to turn people away at the airport based on what? It's not going to be based on their beliefs, because you have no idea of knowing what their beliefs are. So you're going to be turning them away based upon a man-made criteria into which they happen to have been born. And that's kind of racism. Robbie's in Windsor. Robbie, what would you like to say?
Well, I'm just so angry about the whole thing. I never considered myself an American. I was born in New York City. And
I don't know quite what that means.
Because I always thought New York should secede from the Union and become its own country.
Okay, yes.
And but I've lived here for nearly 40 years, and I love this country. And I think America is an incredibly racist country and anti-everything. And I despair, because I was telling your colleague that I met a few months ago in Israel, and he came and talked to my synagogue, a wonderful Palestinian Israeli Muslim who runs a community center for Arabs and Jews.
Gosh.
And it's the most, I mean, he's a fantastic man, and he has been to America. But are they saying that they're going to reject him because he's a Muslim? I mean, I really despair. You know?
Well, he would. He'd turn them all away. Of course he would. It's the only way they can be safe.
And all the people, I mean, I went to Israel for the first time ever in June, and I met the most incredible people, both Arabs and Jews, and people who are working for a united, peaceful Israel.
In the face of opposition from all sides, it should be.
Exactly. And you just don't hear about those things. And I really don't understand. I mean, Americans are blindsided. They believe everything they're told about their country, that it's this wonderful country, and it's not actually a wonderful country.
And I guess the less comparisons you can make by dint of geography or culture, then the easier it is to persuade people that they're somehow on the winning side when they've got no health care, when they end up on food stamps, living in tents in the woods after the bankers foreclosed on their houses, but the bankers who gave them the mortgages they never should have got have waltzed down Wall Street with enormous bonuses, but still Donald Trump is held up as some sort of hero. It's quite bizarre.
I just don't understand it. I really don't.
I understand how he gets away with what he's doing, because these people should actually be blaming rapacious billionaires who've treated humanity like a crop that needs to be harvested, but they're not. So you need to give them something else to blame. Muslims step up to the plate in perfect time.
So anyway, I'm very proud to be British and live here, and I wish in some ways that Americans would take the blinders from their eyes.
You've had a black president. We haven't had
Well,
Prime Minister
No,
from an ethnic minority? I'm not going to play top Trump.
Yeah,
who's
but
the
they've
most
also
pluralist.
done everything they could to disrupt his presidency.
This side of the argument has. I mean, Trump really should have been removed, just not deliberately removed, but anybody in the country should have just ceased to take him seriously on any political matters when he started going on about Barack Obama's passport being faked. A birther.
Yes, but
They're called birthers.
I mean, it's just the American government. It's the way they vote in their Congress and their Senate with their checks and balances. And, you know, it took Bush 8 years to screw America. And they gave Obama a year, and then they voted against him. So he's been, had his hands
tied behind his back, really. It's, well, you're right. I like your blend of Windsor sensibilities with New York cynicism. I think it's a lovely cocktail. Robbie, thank you very much indeed. What are you going to do? How are you going to tell at the airport who's a Muslim and who isn't? Serious question. Because where it leads you is to the very uncomfortable conclusion that people like Donald Trump don't care. They're just going to turn everyone away unless you're like him. Unless you're like me, you're not coming in. That's going to be some world. What if we just banned everyone called Donald from Great Britain? How would other Donalds feel about that? Because that's how Muslims feel when you talk about terrorists and Islam as if they're interchangeable and identical. Of course, these terrorists are using their interpretation of their religion to justify much of what they do. Of course they are. It's pointless to pretend otherwise. The idea that you can have Islamism without Islam is silly. It's palpably absurd. But the notion that everybody called Donald is somehow responsible for Donald Trump, or everybody called Richard is somehow responsible for the shoe bomber Richard Reed, it's just absurd. So how are you going to do it at the airport, Donald? How are you going to tell who's a Muslim and who isn't? Riddle me this on 0345 606 0973. James is in Staines. James, what would you like to say?
Hi, how you doing, James?
I'm grand, mate.
I think that the big problem that you've got is that people like Donald Trump use the psychology of large groups of people, where you can get large groups of people in a room and put big flags up, big American flags up, and you can put big PA speakers and you can project your voice out over this crowd and you can whip them up into a frenzy. It doesn't matter what you're saying particularly. It gets to the point, you look at somebody like
you're so right. You're so right.
Or Miley Cyrus, these people who I'm not poo-pooing their music, but I'm just saying that you can get anybody and you can put them in a room and you can market them in such a way, or they can market themselves in such a way that they can say what they like.
I think you're right, and it's the da-dum. Of all the strange places in which to have had this conversation, I used to have it with the lovely women that worked on makeup on the Alan Titchmarsh show, because we'd do these weird debates on the good debates, but obviously simplistic for daytime TV, and they would say you can tell who's going to get a round of applause without listening to the words. It's the people that go da-dum, 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 and then the crowd goes wild. It's very true, but I do think they're listening to what Trump says, not just how he says it.
Yeah, no, there is obviously huge elements of that, and the thing is that he's appealing to, again, and it all boils down to psychology. He's appealing to people's baser instincts, which is people will always revert to self-defense in a given situation. It's fight or flight fundamentally.
Yes.
And when people are threatened by something, you talk about the baths and the fact that 170 times you're 170 times more likely to drown in a bath, but that's not reported, is it? It's not in the news every single day.
Well, I can tell you where I found it. It is reported. I found it in the Bangkok Post in a rather brilliant brilliant opinion piece by a Western journalist called Gwyn Dyer. So you are, for people who missed the first day, you are 170 times more likely to drown in the bath as an American civilian than you are to be killed by a terror attack. So if Donald Trump really was prioritizing the safety of American civilians, he'd be launching a campaign against bathing. It's not
exactly.
Funny. Well, it is funny. Yeah, right. I want you to end with a da-dum, James. Come on, I'm late for the travel news. Give me some rousing rhetoric.
That's not my style.
I'm
not. No, absolutely not. And this is where we'll always fall down, because people, well, I'm going to say like myself, but that seems like a sweeping generalization. But people who are slightly left of centre, or perhaps who are a little bit more liberal in their views, will always try to approach their audience with logic and realism.
Facts rather than feelings. Facts rather than feelings. And it's really, really difficult to break that cycle. Almost impossible. You can adopt the tactics of the rabble-rousers while pursuing an essentially liberal position, but ultimately, most people won't allow their feelings to be diffused with simple facts. And that, I guess, is part of humanity. 0345 606 0973. James, thank you. I will not be banning all people called James from the programme, just on the basis of you expressing your views, any more than I'll ban everybody called Donald from Great Britain because one person called Donald happens to be an epic prune. It just doesn't work like that. Unless, of course, it's ethnicity or a religion, in which case history teaches us you can stand up in public and say they're all rotten. So here's my question. How are you going to tell? How are you going to tell at the airport who's a Muslim and who isn't? Donald. It's 16 minutes after 11. I want to talk about Lucy Allen, but glancing at my switchboard, you're not going to let me yet. Let me just I'll tell you after the travel news who she is and why I need to lick my finger and stick it in the air, see which way the wind is blowing. To me, this should be front page news. She should be facing calls for resignation. Maybe by the end of the programme today she will be. And it's strange times, isn't it? You can't be certain, but I'm pretty sure everybody who's got in touch suggesting that you use pork at the airport to identify who is a Muslim and who isn't is joking, that you have your tongue in your cheek. I'm pretty sure Alan does. I know how he'll do it, James. Sausages. He'll get everyone to eat a sausage on entry. The idea is as farcical and ridiculous as Trump himself. Historically, I believe every winner of the American presidential race has been the one with the most money. As a humanist, stroke pacifist, stroke realist who values reason and logic above all else, I find his politics not only impossible to understand, but terrifying. I see no better reason for getting rid of Trident than Donald Trump. And he's not alone in his suggestion. I hope he's not alone in his sarcasm as well when he suggests that we use bacon or sausages. Kirby says, use bacon, sarnies and beer. I mean, listen, anyone who is making that suggestion, even vaguely seriously, has to recognise it wouldn't just be Muslims that were unable to consume bacon or sausages at the airport. And to be honest, as with most religious observations, there's probably some form of dispensation in place if it's a matter of life and death or a matter of personal safety. So it highlights how ridiculous Donald Trump is. They're cheering, all right? They're cheering. Not many people, not representative of America. I'm genuinely sorry to the couple of people who've been in touch suggesting that I might be maligning America. I love America. I love what it represents. I love, well, I tell you what, for me, it represents this. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. That is what it says on the Statue of Liberty. Maybe show that to some Trump supporters, Wayne in Basildon suggests, and it might remind them who they are meant to be. I don't know, but until we get an answer to that question, you can't really see the people clapping as anything other than deluded, tragic, fearful. Can I say fools? I don't think fools helps. How are you going to tell a Muslim at the airport? How are you going to tell? Mohammed's in Belfast. Hello, mate.
Good morning. James, you're being unfair. Donald Trump is the best thing to happen to the American electoral system from my perspective in God knows how long. What he's done is he split the Republican vote. So the Republicans, the way it works is you have half of them are the real conservatives and half of them are the like really, really paranoid kind of Central American people. And what that means is Hillary is now probably going to win. Now, Trump is going to drop out by Hampshire. It happens every time.
Yeah, it does happen every year. It doesn't mean it's... you can't derive an ought from an is, or an is from an ought, or whatever that clever phrase is that I've just completely messed up.
Santorum won, like, Ohio or Hampshire last time, and his quotes are worse, in my opinion, than Trump's. What the only thing that I'm worried about is that him and Carson will drop out early. And there is one Republican candidate who is very good, and that's Marco Rubio, and he's a brilliant operator, and he could beat Hillary Clinton.
Yes, but he's not a chuntering bigot either. You might not like the kind of free market element of his policies or the kind of protectionism of the status quo, but he's not a chuntering bigot like Trump is, and I think Carson probably is as well, isn't he?
Well, have you actually ever looked into that man's eyes? He's terrifying.
I turned to stone. He's the man who thinks the pyramids were built to store grain in.
Anyhow,
why? I don't give up.
But Trump is doing this because he knows that normally the mental one drops out quite early. Okay, bear in mind that he was thinking about like running as a Democrat either 4 or 8 years ago. Yeah. He's doing this to keep up his publicity. So he's saying it for the sake of it. It's nothing to be worried about. If nothing else, I implore the UK public to back Trump as long as possible to split the Republican vote, and hopefully we will have World War III in a year and a half.
President Trump, President Le Pen, and President Putin. How's that feel for a world just around the corner?
I'm off to Rio or New Zealand.
If you were turning up at JFK, Mohammed, how would I be able to tell whether you were a Muslim or not?
Brown, called Mohammed. Where else have we got? I'm actually not religious, for the record.
No, I kind of figured that, given our previous conversations. But that's my point in a nutshell, isn't it? You're not even religious, but your name's Mohammed. You got brown skin. You're not coming in.
Fair dues. I'll head off to Canada.
He's like the He's like the world's thickest bouncer. That's what he is, with the world's most rubbish hair. Your skin's the wrong colour. You're not coming in. I don't like your name. You're not coming in. I'm not a Muslim. All right. I might have a name. My name's Mohammed. I know people called Jesus in South America who aren't Christians. Prove it. Prove it.
You're right, Donny. You're right, Donny T. I'm off, mate.
27 minutes after 11. I see, you can find the farce in behind the tragedy if you look hard enough. Rachel's in Fulham. Rachel, what would you like to say?
James, you're giving him so much power.
We're laughing at him now. We're laughing at him, Rachel. We're laughing at him.
I hope we're laughing at him. I mean, I'm from New York, and I will still say I'm an American as well, even, being from Manhattan.
Yes.
But this is not, I hope I'm not, eating my words later. This is not the majority of America. But as we report it this way, as we call them fools, as we call them uneducated, it does almost the same thing that, young, vulnerable, young men who can be fundamentalized.
It radicalizes people.
Yeah,
it radicalizes. Hey, I'm inclined to agree with you, which is why the question I'm asking is, what thread would you pull? How would you do it? How would you play into Mark Twain's worldview and recognize it's easier to fool people than it is to convince them that they've been fooled? How would you convince them?
Well, last week, so I have a friend, this is a friend, and he loves Trump. And I was visiting the U.S. And instead of the normal where I get very defensive, how could this even, I said, I understand how you can feel such fear. I showed him, I said, let's look at Fox News. I said, look at the colors they're using. I literally broke it down like a kindergartner. And I know by saying that, I'm saying the same thing. They're uneducated, etc. They are in just a state of fear. They've been told one thing. Their parents taught them one thing. They watch Fox News. So I literally broke it down. I said, I want you to look at the colors that Fox News is using versus you look at the BBC or something different. And little by little, his defenses broke down.
Yeah, but
in the end... I know we can't do that for everyone.
No, but did it really work? Are you sure? Because I kind of do what you've just described for a living, and I can tell you now, the people who hate me the most are the ones who've been forced to look in a mirror, the ones who've insisted there's monsters under their bed, and I've shone a torch under their bed, and there's nothing there, and they go away hating me more than they did when they rang in to tell me that we're all under threat from Islam or Polish electricians.
I just think the tone that we're saying right now, all the news attention we're giving, will you do me a favor? Will you talk about Humans of New York on your show? I don't know if you know about it.
I don't know. You talk about Humans of New York.
It's on Facebook. Yeah, it's on Facebook. A guy named Brandon started in New York. He takes pictures of people here and there and tells their story. He's now focusing on the Syrian refugees that have gotten clearance to enter America.
I have seen
He has over 16 million followers. The thing I want to do is share this human story.
Well, I'll dig it out, and I will. And I will. But my fear is that will be preaching to the choir. That will be educated, enlightened, relatively decent people with experience of other cultures, other countries even, and certainly other people from other parts of the world, and they find it quite easy to absorb what you've just described. If you're living in if you're living in the boondocks, if you're living in the middle of nowhere, you never really see any Muslims. We had a caller last week, didn't we, from Wales, who said his culture was under threat. I said, how many Muslims do you know? He said, none.